Understanding the quote, the statement suggests that intentional harm deliberately causing damage to another person stems from a deep-seated emotion, described here as hate. In psychological terms, intentional harm implies a conscious choice to inflict pain, whether emotional, physical, or psychological, which could reflect underlying feelings of resentment, envy, anger, or hostility. The emphasis on hate you a lot indicates a strong, personal animosity, distinguishing it from accidental harm or harm caused by negligence. If we assume this quote is inspired by Jungian ideas, it could relate to Jung's concepts of the shadow, projection, and unconscious motivations. Jung believed that human behavior, especially destructive actions, often stems from unconscious drives or repressed emotions. Let's explore these concepts to explain the quote. Jungian context, the shadow and destructive behavior. Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, introduced the concept of the shadow, the unconscious part of the personality that contains repressed weaknesses, desires, and instincts. The shadow encompasses traits we deny in ourselves, often because they are socially unacceptable or personally uncomfortable. When someone intentionally harms another, Jung might argue that this act could stem from their shadow, where feelings like hatred, jealousy, or insecurity reside. Unconscious hatred. If someone harbors intense negative feelings, like hate, but represses them, these emotions may manifest indirectly through harmful actions. Intentionally damaging someone could be an outlet for unresolved anger or resentment that the person hasn't consciously acknowledged. Projection. Jung also described projection, where individuals attribute their own unacceptable feelings or traits to others. If someone feels intense self-hatred or inadequacy, part of their shadow, they might project these feelings onto another person, perceiving them as the source of their discomfort. This could lead to intentional harm as a way to punish the other for qualities the aggressor denies in themselves. Personal animosity. The phrase hate you a lot suggests a personal connection. In Jungian terms, strong emotional reactions to others often reflect an encounter with one's own psyche. The target of the harm might symbolize something the aggressor rejects or fears within themselves, prompting a destructive response. Psychological motivations for intentional harm. To understand why someone would intentionally damage another, we can explore psychological motivations that align with Jung's theories and broader psychological principles. Unresolved conflict. Jung emphasized the importance of integrating the shadow to achieve psychological wholeness. If someone suppresses their anger or hatred instead of addressing it, these emotions may erupt in destructive ways, such as intentionally hurting someone they associate with their pain. Power and control. Intentional harm often stems from a desire to assert dominance or control. In Jungian terms, this could reflect an inflated ego that seeks to suppress others to avoid confronting its own vulnerabilities. Envy or resentment. Jung noted that envy often arises when someone perceives another as embodying qualities they lack or desire. Intentionally damaging someone could be an attempt to diminish their perceived superiority. Archetypal dynamics. Jung's concept of archetypes, universal patterns of behavior, might frame the aggressor as acting out the destroyer archetype, driven by unconscious forces to tear down what they perceive as a threat. The role of intention. The quote emphasizes intentionality, which is key to understanding the act's psychological weight. In Jungian psychology, conscious actions reflect the ego's involvement, but they may also be influenced by unconscious forces. For example, conscious intent. If someone deliberately harms another, they may be fully aware of their hatred and choose to act on it. This could stem from a personal grudge, betrayal, or perceived injustice. Unconscious intent. Alternatively, the aggressor might not fully recognize their hatred, but their shadow drives the behavior. For instance, they might rationalize their actions as justified while the true motivation, hatred, remains hidden. Jung would likely argue that intentional harm requires self-reflection to uncover the root cause. Without this, the aggressor remains unaware of their shadow, perpetuating destructive patterns. Implications for relationships. The quote highlights the impact of intentional harm on relationships. From a Jungian perspective, betrayal and trust. Intentional harm often feels like a betrayal because it violates trust. Jung believed that relationships are a crucible for psychological growth, as they force us to confront our shadow. When someone harms another intentionally, it may reflect their inability to integrate their own darkness, which they then project onto the relationship. Healing through awareness. Jung's approach to psychology emphasizes individuation, the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche. For the victim of intentional harm, recognizing the aggressor's behavior as a reflection of their own inner conflict can be a step toward healing. For the aggressor, confronting their hatred and its source is essential for personal growth. Is this truly a Carl Jung quote? While the quote resonates with Jungian ideas, there's no definitive evidence in Jung's major works. For example, Psychological Types, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, or Man and His Symbols, that he said or wrote these exact words. It's possible the quote is a modern paraphrase or an attribution inspired by Jung's ideas about the shadow and human motivations. Misattributions are common with famous figures like Jung, especially when their concepts are simplified for broader audiences. If this is a paraphrased or apocryphal quote, it still captures Jung's insight into the destructive potential of unacknowledged emotions. For example, Jung wrote in A.I.N. Collected Works, Volume 9, Part 2, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort." This suggests that harmful actions, like intentional damage, often stem from a failure to confront one's shadow. Practical takeaways. To apply this quote in a real-world context, consider the following. For the victim, if someone has intentionally harmed you, recognize that their actions may reflect their own inner struggles rather than your worth. Jung's concept of individuation encourages focusing on your own growth and resilience rather than internalizing the harm. For the aggressor, if you find yourself wanting to harm someone, reflect on the source of your feelings. Are you projecting your own insecurities or unresolved pain? Jungian therapy or self-reflection can help uncover these motivations. Conflict resolution. Addressing intentional harm requires open communication and, if possible, mutual recognition of underlying emotions. Jung's emphasis on integrating the shadow suggests that both parties can grow by acknowledging their roles in the conflict. Broader psychological insights. Beyond Jung, other psychological frameworks can shed light on the quote. Freudian perspective. Sigmund Freud might interpret intentional harm as an expression of repressed aggression or the id's impulses breaking through the ego's control. Cognitive behavioral view. Cognitive psychology might frame intentional harm as a result of distorted thinking patterns, such as catastrophic beliefs about the other person's intentions. Social psychology. Theories like social identity theory suggest that harming someone intentionally could stem from in-group/out-group dynamics, where hatred is fueled by perceived differences or threats. Conclusion. The quote, while possibly not directly from Carl Jung, reflects psychological truths about human behavior and aligns with Jung's theories about the shadow, projection, and unconscious motivations. Intentional harm signals deep emotional conflict, often rooted in unacknowledged hatred or insecurity. By exploring these dynamics through a Jungian lens, we can better understand why people hurt others and how to address such behavior through self-awareness and integration.